Absolutely. And so what better way to actually revisit that than none other than a Shadow Rider Calyrex and Zamazenta mirror. As we take a look at our next matchup, of course, we are going to be featuring Marco Silva, the second place finalist at the North America International Championships, the LAIC champion, versus Michael Kelsch, who comes in off the back of a second place at Worlds, a top 4 at Worlds, 2 regional championship wins this season alone. These are 2 of the best and brightest that Europe has to offer.
It is going to be so amazing. This literally could have been the World Championship Finals. If you told me this is who we saw on Sunday, I would totally believe it. They come in to this tournament as 2 of the absolute favorites, and what I love about this is Michael is actually using something completely different. He, this season, has been a big pioneer of Ice Rider. He has been a big Miraidon player as well, pairing those 2 with each other, really bringing that duo to the forefront. But Michael's going back to Zamazenta. Let's not forget, he was the Zamazenta player at the World Championships last year, getting a top 4 finish in a format where Zamazenta was not as popular. Michael always believed in it in the previous format. He has brought it back. And what I love about this team is a couple of big techs. You see the Assault Vest Champa, which was really picking up in usage the last couple of weeks with that Ghost Terra. That's going to be huge in a mirror match against Zamazenta. And Dragonite Chimpao, I mean, that's back. Like, here we are in this regulation.
So back.
Yeah, 2 restricteds and you still got it.
Wow. Yeah, Choice Band Dragonite, I think something we should call out is that low kick on the Dragonite as well as the Aqua Jet. I think these are 2 moves that we haven't normally seen on past Choice Band Dragonites in the past. You know, oftentimes you're seeing like, oh yeah, Terra Normal Exchange Speed, that's really where you're gonna get the gold with the Dragonite. But I think when you look at just the priority option there, in the secondary priority option, the Aqua Jet, the low kick, that's gonna be so nice for like opposing Zamazenta or anything else that's gonna be really big and heavy. Dragonite looks good.
Yeah, it's such an interesting pick here, and of course used because it has that inner focus as well, giving it that immunity to fake out. We've actually got double redirection here with Ogerpon and Amoonguss to be paired with the Shadow Rider as well, just protecting it for a little bit longer. Now, Michael has opted for the Ghost Terra Focus Sash variant. This plays out very differently from the Nasty Plot sets, because I think with this set, what you want to do is keep chipping away and then get to a point where you can get Calyrex out, it's got Focus Sash, and you just keep clicking that Astral Barrage button and just win the game from there. Chimpao, I think, really piques my interest here because of the Ghost Terra plus the Runation. That's actually a really nice way to deal with opposing Zamazentas. Now, of course, if you Ghost Terra, though, you will become weak to the Astral Barrage from the opposing side, but that's a key pick here. And I love this. I mean, Michael, obviously, has used so many different teams to great success. I think I would have honestly pinned him on Miraidon plus Ice Rider coming into this. He's going back to Zamazenta. We've got Marco Silva. If you watch the North American International Championships, he should not be any surprise here. And he's just running it back. He's using Calyrex Zamazenta. He has been so strong with this duo. And I think he said at NAIC, hey, I don't think this is the best meta call, but I'm the best player with this. So I'm just going to make it work.
Absolutely. It is going to be the exact 6, right? And so maybe there are a couple of maybe move changes, or you've also done a little bit of training to make sure that you're really caught up to speed with the meta. But I think what really made this team so powerful for a lot of people is just the options that it has. You heard Paul Ruiz talk about the options that Eric had on his team when trying to think about the matchup. But when you look at Shadow Rider, Calyrex, and Zamazenta teams, oftentimes the core around them is also very flexible for the supporting factors.
Absolutely, yeah, and this is a very different Shadow Rider Zama team, right? This is going to be the Life Orb Nasty Plot set, and so Marco exerts a lot more offense immediately from that Calyrex. One of the biggest trends, by the way, coming into the World Championships is with Life Orb Calyrex Shadow Rider, a lot of people have generally been using Timid Max Speed. You want to give yourself a chance to win that speed tie against opposing Calyrexes. We actually saw a big shift to Modest, and the idea is with Modest, with the Nasty Plot boost, you could one-shot Zamazentas with Psychic, for example. Astral Barrage becomes even stronger. Michael, with that Focus Sash variant, generally should be max speed. I'd be absolutely shocked if we were. And so it's going to be interesting to see that dynamic. And then both players have to play around the wide guard like each others have.
Oh, that is such a tough call, and like that's where the coin flips come back in. Are you going to expect the wide guard? But what if you're able to weave good spread damage past that, and you just call that your opponent isn't going to click that button? And so I think in this matchup, we should expect to see the Shadow Rider, Calyrex, and Zama on both sides.
Yes.
But then what?
That's a great question. I think from like Michael's end, like the Chimpao can be really powerful because you thread in Sucker Punch immediately into Shadow Rider. It is interesting as well because this Chimpao is not running Crunch, right? The Assault Vest that actually has double priority with Ice Shard and Sucker Punch. And so like, Chien-Pao should be good into Shadow Rider, but Shadow Rider could theoretically just say, you know what, I'm going to Dark Terra, I'm going to Nasty Plot, have fun Sucker Punching me. You don't have Crunch, you don't actually have that much that scares me, but if you Terra Dark the Shadow Rider, it becomes weak to the body press from Michael Zamazenta, right? And so, Chien-Pao, I think, really interesting Pokemon. Amoonguss is always annoying to deal with. However, this Amoonguss obviously is staring down a Rillaboom from the opposing side. Potentially, it is staring down Ogerpon, which of course can go for Follow Me as well. Crucially, it is Fire Terra Amoonguss. A lot of people like Water Terra Amoonguss, which would be weaker in this matchup. With Fire Terra, like, if you think Marco is actually going to drop the Ogerpon, suddenly it actually becomes a really viable pick where you just Terra once, get a Spore off, and play the game from there. I want to see Dragonite here because it is double, you know, Intimidate or double Fake Out from the opposing side. And so Dragonite can do a lot. The main scary thing here is it's like it can't actually damage the Shadow Rider that much unless you click Outrage and Outrage lands into Shadow Rider. But if you click out, like Outrage is one of those moves you want to click in the end game, right? It doesn't feel that great in the early game. Normal Terra Extreme Speed, that feels awful into Shadow Rider and Zamazenta, right? It's not good into that duo. And so, yeah, I'm curious if Dragonite comes out here. It actually doesn't feel the greatest to bring.
I like the Cornerstone Ogerpon. I think looking at that, it just has great type matchups into everything else that Marco has. You're going to be getting big Ivy Cudgels off into the Incineroar, as well as even the opposing Ogerpon Heartflame if you see that.
Totally.
And it's going to be doing good damage into basically everything else that it's going to hit neutrally for. But I'm also looking at Follow Me. I think that can provide so much value, especially if you're trying to get some sort of setup or even just keep one of those restricted safe. I think being able to have that as just a powerful supportive option alongside, of course, like Rage Powder from the Amoonguss. Well, Follow Me doesn't have to deal with those grass types. You'll always be able to redirect something away.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think if we now turn to Marco's side, it's interesting because, like, Rillaboom doesn't really feel that great in this matchup. That's going to be one of your Spore immunities, but, like, it doesn't do that much damage, obviously, to Zamazenta, Chien-Pao, you know, Rock. It can, like, at least hold itself up against Rock Ogerpon, but, like, it doesn't feel the best, right? Fire Ogerpon is really interesting because it does threaten Zamazenta, it does threaten Chien-Pao, and it gives you the Amoonguss answer as well, right? So it feels like intuitively not a bad pick. Even just, like, it could be even a Terra candidate, for example. I think from Marco's end, most of the time you might want to consider Dark Terraing or Shadow Rider because otherwise you literally just fall to an Astral Barrage from the opposing end, but both players' Zamazentas are going to be such a big deal in this matchup where, like, both of you are threatening with Wide Guard, and honestly, one of the things to pay attention to is who Zamazenta is faster. If you have the faster Zamazenta, that can go a long way in damaging the opposing Zama and maybe comboing it and getting a knockout before they even get the chance to move.
Yeah, oh boy. And in terms of speed control, there actually isn't a whole lot on either side. So there's not really a way to flip the script.
Yeah, so both of these teams are relying on more fundamentals, being like, I don't really need a Tailwind, Trick Room, or Icy Wind because it's like my Calyrex is so fast anyway, and I have the proper defense, right? Redirection is so common, and you see both players having redirection to support their Calyrexes, and so I think what will be interesting is for Michael, you try to exert pressure early on with your Calyrex, try to force out a Terra. Calyrex Zamazenta as a duo is a very viable lead combination to begin with as well, right? And Zamazenta, when it hits the field, one of the questions I have is, do you have any ways to punish it, right? I think like Amoonguss actually is probably one of the best things to deal with opposing Zamazentas because you just don't do that much damage with your attacks, and neither of these Zamazentas are actually going to be Grass Terra either, so you are more vulnerable to getting hit by Spores. And so that's one potential like Pokemon that Michael can leverage, for example, in the early game.
I kind of like the Raging Bolt though. I mean, for Marco, like outside of having to deal with, let's say, an Outrage, I like the typing that it has, maybe even being able to force, or let's say you take advantage of a Dragon Terra from Michael's Zamazenta. I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm just like a Raging Bolt stan. I'd like to see it in any matchup.
Totally, yeah. I think it's an interesting one where it doesn't feel like the most intuitive, but like this is Worlds, right? Sometimes it's not about what feels like the most intuitive. It's about what you have practice in and what your lines are, right? And we saw that on round 1 of Stream where Paul Ruiz was bringing an Urshifu into a Sun matchup against Raging Bolt and Koraidon and Fluttermane, right? But yeah, I think Raging Bolt's an interesting one here because it feels probably often pressure to go for Terra if you're up against like Chien-Pao, for example. That being said, this Chien-Pao is probably going to be less offensive, and so I would actually expect Raging Bolt on Marco's end to definitely survive an Ice Spinner from Michael's end. The Raging Bolt, I think, can be really great if you force a Terra out of Zamazenta, because then you suddenly have that Dragon Pulse, of course, as well. But I think it's a little bit spooky because Raging Bolt into Zamazenta always feels like this awkward dance where like body press just does so much damage. And from Michael's end, like Chien-Pao Zamazenta is one of the big duos to watch out for. He led this duo to a top 4 finish at the World Championships last year. And this is a new way to play Chien-Pao Zamazenta. Assault Vest plus Runation, right? If you bring something down to 50%, there are so few Pokemon that can take a body press in Sword of Rune. And so this duo often can just like snipe something off and finish them off immediately.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I was really tunneling in on the Sword of Ruin next to the Dragonite because that's been such a classic combo that I completely missed the fact that you've got Sword of Ruin next to a Zamazenta of all things. And just being able to get that defense boost right away as the Zamazenta hits the field, you're already amplifying the body presses even more. So it's definitely a scary prospect. But as Michael can take advantage of the Sword of Ruin, so can Marco.
Yep, exactly. That's a really, really good point. And so you have to be careful, right? I think part of a big thing I want to pay attention to in this game is who do you Terra, because there aren't that many like quote-unquote safe Terras, right? If Marco Dark Terras at Calyrex, well now you open up new weaknesses, especially to body press on the opposing end. If you're Michael, for example, and you end up bringing that Dragonite, well normal Terra is great against the Calyrex, but it's awful until the opposing Zamazentas as well. And I think what I'm excited to see in particular is I would imagine Michael has run this practice match a lot, right? Marco's using the exact same team that he brought to the North American Internationals, but Michael's team is a little bit newer here, right? It's got Dragonite, which is not a common pick in this metagame, and it's also got the Assault Vest Chien-Pao. That's been picking up in usage, but it's like the combo of these 6 actually are not very common. And so I imagine Michael probably has a more concrete game plan coming into this matchup.
Although he said himself on social media that he wasn't feeling particularly confident.
Never believe it. He says that before every tournament. I'm like, I won't fall for your tricks, man. I've heard this one too many times.
Once.
Yeah.
But yeah, third time, joke's on me for believing you.
Exactly.
We'll see how it goes, though. Of course, at the World Championships, anything can happen, and we are going to be seeing some great players go home early on in the day. But we've got 2 players right now sitting at 1-0 records, 2 of the best in Europe about to take the stage against each other. So let's get into Swiss round number 2 here at the Pokemon World Championships for 2025 between Michael Kelsch and Marco Silva.
2 of the favorites to win this tournament, and it is going to be the Rillaboom making an appearance here immediately, pressuring Fake Out. Feels really awkward into Zamazenta, of course, right? But it is going to be a solid Pokemon to put on pressure. Obviously, can Grassy Glide to break the Calyrex's Focus Sash as well. And so here we go. First defense boost comes out from Michael's end.
Of course, now you do have the grassy terrain hitting the field, a little bit of recovery for all of the Pokemon that are going to be connected to it. But I also take a look at something like the Grassy Glide. I mean, when you look at these Pokemon, I think you have to pay attention to the fact that Shadow Rider Calyrex could get its Focus Sash broken by that really early, and then it makes it a bit more vulnerable to an attack later.
And it's just going to be a double protect to start from Michael's end. I think this is smart. You gotta just want to see, is there a potential Terra commit on the opposing end? If you Fake Out with the Rillaboom, you do pressure with an Encore immediately afterwards. And so it's going to be that double protect to start.
Yeah, and likely a Fake Out that went into that Zamazenta as well. So it's just a safe turn here. I think Michael doesn't want to get too risky with anything, especially because of how many ways that turn could have potentially gone wrong. And you've got Zamazenta and Shadow Rider Calyrex, I think, in a pretty good position versus what Marco has.
Yeah, I think the main scary thing is this next turn, you are threatened by a Grassy Glide, which of course would go before that Encore, as well as a target, the Heavy Slam onto the Shadow Rider as well. And so, okay!
Oh boy! There is
like
a threat of Wide Guard from this opposing Zamazenta, and so is that something that Marco decides to go for, or is Michael gonna run away with this for second turn of the game? You've got this Terra Racialization on top of the Astral Barrage as well, so this Calyrex is looking mighty scary.
And the idea is just to increase Astral Barrage damage. No Wide Guard comes out, but it makes sense because you're trying to go for probably a double up onto the Shadow Rider, so Astral there does decent damage. We saw Zamazenta get the defense boost first. Body Press comes out, and it doesn't get the knockout!
This hang on from the opposing Zamazenta is critical. You're dealing over 50% damage to the Zamazenta on Michael's side, and you break the Focus Sash with the U-turn on this Rillaboom. What a turn!
Such a big survival, especially because it wasn't the Wood Hammer on the Shadow Rider, it wasn't Grassy Glide and the Heavy Slam. It actually ends up being U-turn. So I think Marco there was kind of saying, look, if you stay in with Shadow Rider, I will break your Sash. If not, you might switch out the Shadow Rider because you would think it's going to be Grassy Glide plus a double up, right? And so I think Michael, if he got in that knockout, he would have been in such good shape. Now Shadow Rider from Marco's end ends up coming out. There's wide guard support from both ends, but this is one of the things. If you are going to be slower than my Zamazenta, it means you're probably a little bit bulkier, and that little bit of extra bulk is what Marco needs to survive there. That probably was a damage roll that turn.
But now we have to pay attention to the speeds of these Shadow Rider Calyrexes. I think that's another thing, especially when you're looking at these big, powerful, restricted Pokemon and the mirror. Can Michael move first? Maybe does Marco not wide guard?
Yeah, the wide guard war is so interesting here. You can see Michael going for wide guard plus psychic. I think generally a pretty safe play here. And so this means no Astral Barrage, but it means Marco has the opportunity to go for something like a psychic or a nasty plot. Both players going for wide guard, but let's see, did either of them actually lock that Astral Barrage? So risky to click right now. It's going to be Michael's Calyrex moving first, which is to be expected here. I think the main question is, would Marco actually run max speed on his Shadow Rider? But it's going to be the first knockout going Michael's way.
Definitely a knockout you would have liked to get, but now it's going to be the Shadow Rider Calyrex cleaning up that Zamazenta, gives it that boost, and the Shadow Rider Calyrex on Michael's side does survive that Psychic.
And so this is the logic behind bringing Rillaboom, right? Like, it's not great into Zamazenta, but you can use it to just slowly force your way into the Shadow Rider. Actually ends up being the Ogerpon here, but crucially, this Ogerpon does have Grassy Glide as well. So Marco now in this position where you do just threaten with Grassy Glide onto the Shadow Rider and then a Psychic into the Zamazenta slot. Then the question I have is Zamazenta bulky enough to take a Psychic? It's not boosted, but of course it is Life Orb on the opposing end. But it's been a back and forth in terms of trades here. We see the final two Pokemon in the back. It is going to be the Dragonite and the Chien-Pao, which I think is really cool.
It does give you that extra priority option so that you can move before those Grassy Glides as long as that grassy terrain is active. But you're going to protect this Calyrex first, hoping to bait out something like that Grassy Glide. And that's exactly what happens there from Marco, as it unfortunately goes right into that protected Calyrex. But this gives valuable time here for the Zamazenta to potentially make another move. It's going to have to take this Astral Barrage first. So if it can hang on through this, then it's able to get an attack on, and it does survive! No way!
Oh my goodness, that's huge. You get a gigantic body press off into the Ogerpon now. I mean, hey, Dragonite does have extreme speed in the back. It can just keep extreme speeding into the Ogerpon. Rillaboom can't fake it out either. Going for the Astral Barrage there gets so much damage off, but just falls short. And in this game, it's been really both Zamazenta surviving just with a sliver of HP. You can go for another Grassy Glide now, right? And so you could switch out into, either the Chien-Pao or the Dragonite. And then the question is, does Marco capitalize off that? You could go for a wide guard here instead of a protect. You can see Michael's really debating between the two, but he's like, you know what? I'm going to protect here. That gives me wide guard for one more turn.
Oh my goodness. It could still, like, Marco could still get back into this, I think.
Absolutely.
Especially if he's able to capitalize on what Michael has decided to lock into. It's a protect here. So, but Marco is looking unhappy with this one. I think he's going to be upset with the damage. As the Grassy Glide into the Dragonite, you're not going to be able to pick up the knockout onto that opposing Shadow Rider Calyrex. And it was just this, is this Astral Barrage? I thought it was just a Psychic into that Zamazenta. That would have been crazy. But of course, the Dragonite takes that. Really critical to survive that particular attack. Yeah,
big deal though, because you could tell Michael was considering that wide guard. Wide guard would have been huge there. You get your Dragonite in relatively safely. So Marco maybe actually was like, oh, okay, I called it right, but it didn't look like that from the camera, right? And so I think that's a huge deal because now you've just gotten so much damage across the board. And so this is still really, really scary. Everything is so low at this point. We're actually seeing a gamble here. It's going to be the Dragonite pivoting out, but this means that your Zamazenta is vulnerable to just getting knocked out right now.
Yeah, and especially when this Shadow Rider Calyrex is so much faster. At least you don't have the grassy terrain, but the Psychic is plenty for this Zamazenta to get knocked out, and now that's a nice boost going over to the Shadow Rider Calyrex here from Marco.
Yeah, two back-to-back fantastic turns by Marco. You even get an extra attack off with the Ogerpon as well. It is going to be the Ivy Cudgel. That's super effective, and Chien-Pao is down. It felt like Michael had so much momentum, but he was gambling that turn a little bit, and it just ends up being Zamazenta fainting, and now you're down to your final two Pokemon at such low health.
Wow, and you still have that Rillaboom in the back, so you can switch it in, set up the terrain again, and that is whatever KO you want with the Grassy Glide.
Oh my goodness. It feels like Marco is just really showing why he's been such a phenomenal player this season. And the Astral Barrage, I mean, this just shows how crazy Life Orb Astral Barrage Calyrex is, right? And so Michael not clicking that wide guard a couple of turns allows Marco to just keep getting damage and damage and damage. And so Down to the final two Pokemon here. You do have Extreme Speed and Astral Barrage Pressure, but Marco can consider switching in that Rillaboom, turning the terrain on. It's actually not going to be a switch, though.
But that's a terrestrialization. You actually saw that Extreme Speed go into that Shadow Rider Calyrex. It would have otherwise been immune, but now that Marco has decided to terrestrialize into that Dark type, you are definitely going to have to take that.
But
at least you do have to follow me, so there is still a safe play that Marco could play around. But could you imagine if that didn't happen and Ogerpon still gets knocked out?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's like if it's not a follow me, then you do get the Extreme Speed off into it, right? I like the gamble here, but it's not going to end up being enough. This Dark Terra now timed perfectly from Marco's end, conserves it all the way until the final turn of the game. It's going to survive, and now Astral Barrage will be a double knockout in return.
Congratulations to Marco Silva. What a great game number 1 for him, and especially having to kind of make the comeback after those first couple of good turns there from Michael, but we got to start thinking about this game number 2.
I really think, yeah, Rillaboom and then the double Grassy Glide Pressure makes this a lot harder for Michael Shadow Rider. And I was actually kind of surprised to see Shadow Rider being led on Michael's end, because I think it's often like the Pokemon that you want to close out the game with. So leading it honestly just makes it a lot more vulnerable. But I think it makes sense because maybe he wanted to just like apply immediate pressure right from the get-go. I mean, if you got the knockout on a Zamazenta there as well, your Zamazenta would have been so much healthier, then would have been able to likely survive even more attacks from the opposing side. So that was definitely a back and forth battle. I think the Pokemon choices make sense from both players' end. Michael just gambling that game though on the switch into Chien-Pao, hoping to just get a knockout with that sort of rune. But yeah, Marco just calls and it's like, I'm just gonna knock out your Zamazenta.
It's a tough decision to have to make. Okay, maybe it was a sigh of relief that I saw. It's really hard to tell sometimes because of the intensity of the moment, but it is really, really hard in this particular format. And I don't think we can stress enough how challenging it is. Sometimes you do have to make these very risky calls because if you get it right, you win. That's what it's going to take.
Exactly, and I think this game would actually look completely different. The one turn I really want to point to was just when it was Ivy Cudgel plus the Psychic and just a double up there. I think Michael was maybe hoping, well, you know I have Wide Guard Pressure. Are you really going to click Astral Barrage again? You also could switch into Rillaboom, and so he was thinking, well, if I switch into Chien-Pao, it ends up being Psychic into the Chien-Pao slot, and I get the Heavy Slam in Sword of Rune. That might be enough to just win the game, because if you eliminate the Shadow Rider from that point, Dragonite absolutely cleans up. And so Michael basically was like, I'm going to go all in on this turn, but Marco says, I'm not going to give you that opportunity, and ends up responding. And I mean, to get a double knockout like that, Chien-Pao didn't do anything, right? And I thought it could actually be a possible Terra candidate coming into this matchup.
That's something that Michael can adjust to in this game number 2, but I think Marco has so much critical information from that game 1. You know, Michael's Zamazenta and Shadow Rider Calyrex are faster. So how do you now take that and turn that into an asset for your game number 2?
Absolutely, and I think Rillaboom and Ogerpon made a lot of sense, right? It's like, okay, I don't care if you're faster if I have Fake Out Pressure and I have Grassy Glide Pressure. And so I really love how Marco ended up using both of those in that matchup. I think it makes sense to drop Incineroar and Raging Bull here, right? Incineroar is not going to be incredible into the Dragonite. The Chien-Pao actually doesn't really care about attack drops because it is this Ruination set. You do have Ghost Hair on Incin here, but it isn't a Will-O-Wisp set on the Incineroar, so it's not as good into, say, dealing with Zamazenta. I could see both players honestly running it back. I think for Michael, a lead change maybe makes some sense, but let's see.
Well, for this game number 2, it is going to be that Zamazenta and Rillaboom again here for Marco, and Michael's content. Just going to run back. The Shadow Rider Calyrex and Zama.
Yeah, I mean, Michael might be saying, look, I had actually a pretty good advantage in that last game, and things just all completely collapsed on that one crucial turn when you Psychic my Zamazenta. So, and it was also like the Zamazenta on Marco's end barely hung on in that last game. It'd be a different game if you get the knockout. So, question here is, do you kind of just go for the safe, double protect once again?
Oh, another risky turn. It paid off last time, though. So if Marco decides to not click Wide Guard again, then that is still so much damage landing onto both targets. And that's the name of the game of the Shadow Rider Calyrex, is you want to have good damage trades. Let's see this Terrestrialization.
Yeah, so like I said, coming into this, normally with these Shadow Riders, you kind of save it until the end game. But now Michael's like, you know what? I'm just going to go all in on offense early, get some Astral Barrages across the board. And so for Marco's end, It's going to be the Grassy Glide, and so Shadow Rider will likely fake this turn if it is going to be the Heavy Slam. No fake out coming out. And if Marco knocks out Shadow Rider this early on, it's an amazing start for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, this Astral Barrage still is able to do quite a bit. So now, can the body press actually goes into the Rillaboom? So a knockout here for Michael, but can Marco deliver the same intensity for this first turn? Big damage trades here, and the Heavy Slam knocks it out. One Pokemon down a piece, and Marco is so happy with this turn.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Terror out, right? Like, Shadow Rider got a little bit of extra damage off, and that damage actually may be important to, one, knock out the Rillaboom with that body press. And we actually see an adjustment here with the Ogerpon instead, but I think it's a really, really strong start for Marco here. Rillaboom is not actually that big in this matchup other than to enable either Grassy Glide or threaten with Fake Out and get Terraina. You want to use it specifically to deal with Shadow Rider. Like, it's not that good into Chien-Pao or Ogerpon, and so I think that Marco is probably more than content from that turn.
Yeah. And now you've got your own Hearthflame Ogerpon in front of this Chien-Pao, and it cannot Terrasilize away. What a great position here for Marco.
So I think this is interesting because Michael committed that Terra, right? And so you can't go for something like Ghost Terra. You are incredibly, incredibly vulnerable to body press from the Zamazenta. What Michael does have going for him is that his Pokemon are faster, right? So you can threaten with like a Runation plus a body press, for example, and try to get a knockout. You could also, go for it. That's exactly what looks like he's thinking about. The risk here is if Zamazenta protects, but it's just going to be follow me. So it's going to be a trade most likely. You knock out the Ogerpon, but you also lose your Chien-Pao.
But I think you're okay with that as well, because I think you would really you like the Ogerpon in front of this Chien-Pao, but I think like getting rid of the Ogerpon is great for Michael. Now Marco gets a chance to fire back another attack with this Zamazenta. But I think the question is, like, which do you think is going to be the bigger threat? I think the Chien-Pao makes a lot of sense just to get rid of that Sword of Ruin. And now, wow, what a quick game two.
It's so fast. Yeah,
the final two Pokemon for both trainers? What?
Knockout after knockout after knockout. And yeah, I think eliminating Chien-Pao is a big deal because it's just so good into the Shadow Rider with that Assault Vest set. And so I think for Michael, in theory, Assault Vest Chien-Pao should be really good if you have it out against Shadow Rider, but it's never been the case. In game one, it just faints till the Ivy Cudgel, and in this game, also fades before it gets to hit the field. And so Ogerpon now the new adjustment from Michael's end. It will give some redirection support, but this is looking pretty scary, I think, for Michael.
Oh, you gotta get the wide guard turns right. You still have this.
Crucially,
yeah, you gotta.
I will say, crucially, it is going to be the Water Terra from Marco's Zamazenta, right? So that means that if you Water Terra, you are weak to the Ivy Cudgel from the Ogerpon from Michael's end. And so
True.
You probably don't want to Terra Dark the Calyrex here, right? That doesn't really help defensively, so you might Terra. As you see, yeah, he's going for the Power Whip Body Press, saying, look, if you don't Terra, I just KO you.
Oh.
Calyrex protects. Is it a double protect? Because if not, Michael is instantly back in this one. I would say he actually might even win.
Oh,
but
it's a double protect though. Okay. But now Marco knows. Michael was really trying to go for the gold there with the double attack into the Zamazenta, and I think Marco can safely play around that now.
Yeah, the other key question I have here is like who is faster between the Zamazenta from Marco's end and then the Ogerpon from Michael's end, right? Because if you are slower, that's going to be a nightmare for Michael, where then you can just get hit by Psychic plus a body press and just get KO'd. So if Michael has some sense of Marco's Zamazenta speed stat, could consider going for a Spiky Shield and a body press, for example, instead. And so looks like just opting, yeah, you could also go for Power Whip into the Calyrex. Grassy Terrain is up. That actually will likely just get a one-hit knockout. So let's see. Splitting the damage this time, not going for the double up. And here's the Terra. Who's Terraing? You would think it's going to be Zamazenta.
You would think so.
Yep.
But you never know sometimes if these players want to play it a little bit riskier. But the Water Terra here from the Zamazenta definitely feels a little bit better. But with this Astral Barrage moving first, there was no wide guard. So both of these Pokemon are going to get hit. This Ogerpon, of course, has this sturdy ability, which is going to allow it to hang on with 1 HP. But who is faster now between this Ogerpon and the Zamazenta from Marco? And it's going to be the Ogerpon first.
But it targets the Calyrex, and so now the question is Zamazenta will likely get a knockout with Body Press. Who does it target? Is it a double up into the Ogerpon slot? It is! So now there is no threat of Power Whip anymore into Zamazenta. It is a war between these two Zamazentas, but Marco has the defensive Terra to save him.
It's the attrition for sure at this point.
Yeah, and imagine if it was just wide guard Power Whip that last turn, I think Michael ends up winning this game, but he still can't win. He's got the faster Zamazenta going for Protect here. Oh my goodness. The question is, can Michael survive a body press from the opposing end? Because he's certainly not going to get a knockout onto the opposing Zamazenta with this first body press.
You do get a little bit of grassy terrain recovery, so the protects do make a bit more sense. Maybe it helps you survive a little bit more comfortably than you would have before, but now the grassy terrain is gone, the gloves are off. Let's see these Zamazentas match up into each other. The body press is going to be a little tough there. And I think Marco has this.
He survives, but I don't think body press is doing enough. I think this is going to survive. Let's see. And it hangs on with the sliver.
With a 3-hit knockout there, and Marco with the final body press, he's going to win this set 2-0. And now move into the rest of the World Championships. Day number 1, still undefeated.
How many times did Marco click Astro Barrage in the face of a potential wide guard? Feels like at least 3 or 4 different times between games 1 and 2. Gets it right every single time there. And there was the opportunity potentially, I think, for Michael to have just gone for Protect with the Zamazenta and Power Whip into the Shadow Rider, but ends up not being the case there. And Marco's going to walk away with the win. I mean, he is one of the favorites to win this tournament. He is looking to complete what has been a tremendous season and have his best Worlds run yet, and he defeats Michael Kelsch 2-0 to get started here.
Oh my goodness. I felt all of like the jitters, the anxiety from watching both of them have to navigate through those wide guard turns.
Yeah,
that's just impressive.
I think Michael's probably got to be looking back at the turn, especially since, it was like the Ogre Pawn pressuring with Power Whip onto either Water Terra Zamazenta or the Calyrex Shadow Rider. After the double protect, I think this game, probably just goes the other way if it ends up being wide guard plus Power Whip there, right? As long as the Power Whip connects. But I think Michael maybe was expecting a Psychic. And so imagine if it is Psychic there instead of Astro Barrage. If you don't go for Astro Barrage there, your Zamazenta does not take nearly as much damage. You kind of have to knock out the Ogre Pawn. Then Zamazenta has the extra bit of HP that it needs to win this game. But Marco's Zamazenta, I don't know how he's trained it, but it has been so clutch in the set, hanging out with less than 10 HP both in Game 1 and Game 2.
Okay, that reaction was very easy to understand. That was the reaction of happiness and success. And we're wishing, of course, Marco and Michael both the best of luck as they continue through day 1 of our competition. One of them is going to be like, I don't know, I could really see either of them winning Worlds.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wish we got to see Dragonite do a little bit more in that last game, but this is what I think, like, Dragonite, it looks cool, especially when you're up against, like, double fake-out pressure, but it's not the easiest to execute, and Marco demonstrated why Life Orb Shadow Rider is just such a nightmare, right? He was willing to click Astro Barrage in front of wide guard so many times, but it worked out, I think, literally every time. Like, I can't remember a time where he, like, went for it and it ended up getting blocked. If it like...
He always got damage through.
Exactly, yeah. And so, like, this is the natural dynamic that players have to be ready to play at in this World Championship. Wide guard is everywhere, obviously from Zamazenta. Lunala is the other really common wide guard user, and so, you know, you have to have a lot of confidence in either saying, look, I'm going to click Astro Barrage, and you're either not going to go for wide guard, or if you go for wide guard, you at least can't get anything off with the Zamazenta. But yeah, in Game 1, once again, I point to that key turn where Michael was maybe hoping for a Psychic into a Champ House switch, and it just ends up being a double knockout, complete disaster. And in Game 2, I think the key turn to point to is Zamazenta had the ability to maybe wide guard instead, but, you know, it kind of just feels like a coin flip guessing game right there.
That is the regulation right now. And I think we're, like, to be, like, jokes aside, we are going to see this a lot from the rest of the tournament.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, of course, all of our players are anticipating. They know that this is going to be a very hard mental battle for all of the rounds that they face. But of course, it is Marco Silva waiting on stage for an interview. So let's see how he is feeling after that round.
Thank you so much, Rose. I'm here with Marco Silva, one of the most accomplished Pokemon trainers of the season. Congratulations. How's it feel?
Yeah, it feels great because going to this tournament, I wasn't really sure about what to bring. In the end, I brought the same 6 Pokemon as I brought in NAC, and so far it's going well.
Were you nervous about bringing the same 6? Were you worried that people would prepare for that?
So I figured out that in this metagame, like your team pick, I feel like it matters, but it doesn't really matter that much in the sense that basically a lot of people play like a really similar core. So if they're able to, like, if they practice against your team, but you're not the one playing it, it's not the same. So like if I play, like if my team is really, really popular, people can prep for it, but at the same time, I probably still have some good outs if I'm able to figure out the right game plans.
For sure. And coming into this tournament, were there any teams that you like aggressively practiced against because of your NAIC run?
So I didn't practice against some team in particular. I tried to have a more even matchup spread. Even if while practicing for Worlds, I figured out that the mirror matchup was really important, and also the Sun matchup. I figured out that, well, it might be, I might be wrong, but I figured out that sometimes it's not worth it to basically put like a lot of stuff on your team to just win those matchups. I try to make my team as optimal as possible for basically any team, and yeah, I usually try to work this way.
All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about that match against Michael. In game one, it felt like you were on the back foot for the longest time. Was there a moment when you felt like you could really kick it into gear, or was that all going according to plan?
So usually, yeah, my game plans against those type of teams with AV Chempao and Zamazenta, which is also one of the teams that I practiced with a lot, like before, like between NAC and Worlds. I usually go for this game plan, and yeah, it was kind of going as planned because yeah, I was able to get some key turns in which, for example, I got some really good damage on Dragonite on the switch in, and in the end I was able to close it out.
And then was there a particular reason you made the adjustment to lead the Zamazenta in game two, even though it was so critical in that game one?
So yeah, I decided to kind of leave it open early because I didn't want to gamble my whole game on just his targeting. In fact, if I try to protect on the first turn, I might just get like Terra Astro Barrage and Body Press into Rillaboom. So I try to play like as safe as possible in the first couple of turns. I also usually try to play this way, so I play really safe in the first couple of turns. Then when I figure out that I need to make some calls, I go for those calls. But I figured out I didn't really need to in this case.
So you mentioned you played really safe. You know, you mentioned with your team building, you try and play the field and focus on, you know, overall matchups rather than anything in particular. Any advice for somebody who's looking to adapt that kind of play style?
So I feel like the most important thing is probably to try to get basically the best team as possible with like they're all like the good Pokemon. In this case, of course, like a lot of people tend to say that the teams that I play are really boring. But I figure out that, well, if those teams give me like an option to beat almost any team in the meta, I feel like it's just a good choice. So I practice a lot with him, and yeah, I was able to kind of figure out also some really bad matchups.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marco. Do you have any shout-outs you want to give to anybody at home?
So yeah, I want to shout out Ruben, Stefano Greppi, Pepe, and my little brother. We all practiced together for this tournament, and yeah, so I'm really thankful for them. I also want to shout out my team, Novo Esports, and my fan group of server.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck in the rest of the competition. We'll be back with more action from the Pokemon World Championships after this break.